Hey guys, welcome. It's Jennifer. This is Sacred Story Medicine, where we talk about symbolism, psychology, transformation, all of that deep stuff. We also make it simple and, dare I say, fun. What I do is write brand new stories that incorporate both lineage-based and modern understanding of healing and transformation. So I make fairy tales that are especially for times when your life feels like anything but a fairy tale. Learning through this kind of mytho-poetic framework is really an ancient healing technology. Metaphor is the language of the soul. That is a loose quote from beloved Jungian psychoanalyst Marion Woodman, who has passed away. But I love that, the language of the soul, and I find it to be so true. So thank you for being here for it, and let's dive in. We're going to be talking about the symbolism contained in part 3 of the Heroine's Becoming story. And that, if you haven't heard it yet, is a story all about reclaiming the lost pieces of the self after trauma or long-term stress. And if you didn't hear it yet, I will link it below. But this is a really deep one because this part, especially of the story, is a descent journey, and it really provides a map of our emotional depths and navigating our wounded parts. So to convey like every piece of the symbolism that's packed into this part of the story in one video would kind of be like the fire hydrant coming at you. So I just want to primarily convey 3 things in this video: the role of the heroine archetype and what she does in your life. Also, what the gremlins represent. We meet the gremlins in this part of the story, and how this is relevant to all of us right now. So let's start there. Just a reminder, in this kind of a story, it's called an archetypal story. Every part represents an aspect of one person's psyche. So it's like the story, every piece is all you or me or any of us. But there's another layer of it that's really important. What's present in the individual is also present in the collective, and that includes the underworld and the gremlins. This is the collective shadow, and I think by now that we all know it's there, right? And it doesn't go away by pretending it doesn't exist. Swiss psychologist Carl Jung explained that the shadow we deny as individuals will show up in the collective. And so the more of us who take this heroine's or hero's journey, transforming our own gremlins, returning the wounded child to the heart of the kingdom, the more we will see things shift in the world. And that doesn't mean like that it's our fault that the world is a mess. It's not. There is this pervasive power structure that we see that has existed for a long time, and it bullies and controls and makes life really difficult. And that is true, but it is at the same time true that it depends on the collective energy feeding it and being directed in ways that serve to maintain its structure. It's like we are being asked or prompted to shift that energy. And I think we live in a time that's forcing that change. And we see the collective gremlins are not even hiding anymore. And it's like the most hideous ones are right in our faces. And I don't think that's an accident. I don't know about you, but it's like something, a greater force is saying, that's enough. It's time to choose something different. For those of us who can make the inner journey, we must. And that involves becoming our own heroines. As we began our story, the characters were entering this descent phase. If you watched my video on Inanna's descent, or if you're familiar with that story, it's similar to that. And we are going into the subconscious. Our heroine, along with the characters of the snake, who represents life force energy, and the villager, who represents a protective aspect of the psyche, and she's agreed to help. So they are with this great determination and strength opening this door and passing into the dimly lit descending tunnel. They're going deeper into the psyche, and they're seeking the crown princess, the wounded child. They have this readiness and determination to make the subconscious conscious, to find out what's going on deep inside. That's kind of an important point, because it really is for each of us. We have to make that choice and put forth the effort to make the inner journey. We all, whether we choose to or not, because most of us wouldn't choose it if we had a choice, we come to these thresholds of change. everybody has their dark nights of the soul, but not everybody uses that as an opportunity to walk through the gates of transformation. There are plenty who spend their lives more on the surface, hanging out in the village, as we talked about in part 2 of the heroine's becoming. It's like they never really go deeper. There are those people, and we know them, and we love them, and maybe sometimes they drive us crazy. Maybe sometimes we are them, or we have been in the past. I think it's appropriate to note that where they are is probably just right for them at this time. For those of us who have been initiated and pulled into the descent journey, it's like a choice that doesn't really feel like a choice anymore, right? We have perhaps been prepared, even ever so subtly, perhaps dropping into life, being more tuned into the subconscious, or picking up little tidbits of knowledge from the explorers of consciousness who came before us. We get to continue this journey for ourselves and for the collective to become the way showers and set a new pattern for the next generation, where talking about these things, understanding the subconscious, understanding how our psyches work and how to deal with our gremlins and how to embody our most potent heroine energy, we need human consciousness to continue to evolve. When we are in this descent journey, it's not just an up and down thing like is kind of conveyed in the story. It's not one and done. It's a spiral. And at first we might just take a little peek into our subconscious and come back up, because really our psyche only is going to let us go as far as we can handle. For sure in this story, because it's a story, right? Everything happens way quicker than in real life. We are not going to transform all our gremlins in one visit to the subconscious, and we know that. But the realistic thing that is what happened in the previous parts of the story is that things happen to help prepare our heroine to go deep into the darkness and face the gremlins. You remember back, and if not, I'll just explain it right now, that she started after experiencing all these traumatic events that had her in a freeze response. She started feeling the sense of safety, thawing out the nervous system freeze, mobilizing her dormant energy. Remember when she met the snake? Awakening new layers of consciousness, learning to listen to gut and intuition. That's where she met the mice. And coming to terms with cognitive dissonance and unhelpful mental constructs. And that's when she was meeting the villagers. Along the way, she also learned the importance of love and kindness. So all of that built her capacity to where the story brings us right now, to be where she can hold and work with this intense energy that's present in the depths of her kingdom. She is able now to be the container that holds the transformation. Let that sink in a sec. When we work with this archetype, the heroine, we are strengthening the personal mind, body, spirit container for transformation and expansion. And for many of us, the body is where we most need to attend to that. If, as many of us perhaps have in the past, tried to build that sense of heroine energy from our heads without being really anchored into the body and having the interoception to be able to feel what energy is present, that mental construct of the heroine and go get it and claim your power, it's going to be washed away just as soon as the trigger hits, just as soon as the gremlin energy arises. And that's because the gremlin energy is survival energy, and its origin is buried in the subconscious. So if that energy pattern was formed really early, especially pre-verbally, even perhaps ancestrally, it's not coming up to your brain for processing. It is brutal and quick, and it floods your body, and you find yourself doing exactly what you said you would not. Have you been there? I know I have. The boundaries collapse. The will is gone. The panic, the rage, or the collapse, the avoidance, whatever it is, takes over. That's the gremlins. And we will go deeper on them in a few. For the heroine to take charge of the situation, we need to build the inner capacity to handle the intensity of it all, the intensity of life, right? We need to feel safe, be anchored into our bodies, build our self-trust, practice staying present, being able to pause ourselves when things are intense, and work with whatever energy is there. So that is basically what my work is as a somatic movement therapist. At this part of the story, we see how our heroine, having been through all this preparation, can now access the fierce power of her own archetype. She is mobilized by this emotional energy of sacred wrath that springs from love. So this is the primal need to protect what is precious that so many of us, perhaps especially as little girls, had to suppress. And so our systems have organized around keeping our anger frozen in time. And it's often a bit later in our journeys when we feel safe enough and connected to our bodies enough to let that armor drop, that the freeze thaws and that sacred protective energy finally starts to flow through. We also notice our heroine's determination and focus on what has to be done. So even though we're using the feminine picture of the heroine, this is kind of the masculine side of our energy, and we all need to be able to access that, both feminine and masculine within. She's accessed this momentum, but she's not out of control, right? She's purposefully directing that fiery energy. And again, for those of us who have been conditioned to suppress, to be nice, compliant, the good girl, or maybe we were in positions where it wasn't safe to assert ourselves, this is a big deal. It's learning to tap into that energy, that fierce protective power, and getting comfortable letting it go through our cells and directing it and working with it. Not by the way of a catharsis per se, but as power. So, and that is something that as a functional freeze recovered person myself, I really enjoy teaching. And I can tell you that if you are working on that level of the body and consciously building your internal connections, you will eventually access the power you had to suppress, which is transformative. But also when we've spent years or decades with our anger frozen under the surface, it can be really intense. And we may associate anger with people screaming or being out of control. And we might even be a little, afraid of our own power. But the point is not to, like in the story, rip anybody's heads off or stir ourselves into some kind of tizzy that we have to come down from. It's learning to contain, alchemize, and move energy with clear intent. And it's not that we would always be calm, but we would be accurate and tuned into the situation at hand, responding appropriately to the present moment. Fiercely compassionate, compassionately fierce. That is our heroine. We love knowing that we have an inner heroine. That's the easy part. What about the gremlins? We have to acknowledge them too. We have to love them too. So let's learn what they are. Remember, we're in the subconscious layer now, and I think it's helpful to think of the quote from neuropharmacologist Dr. Candace Pert, and she said the body is the subconscious mind. So what we encounter here, including the gremlins, is going to be recognized as something that we actually feel in our bodies. Emotional response, physical activation. So in our story, each gremlin represents an aspect of an individual's unique creative energy. So first we met in our last part, the snake, who represents this big life force energy that we all have. But we also have our unique soul signature energy, the gifts and the strengths that we all carry into the world that are unique to us. When our system is stuck in a survival mode and wired around this persistent stress and trauma, our creative energy is blocked from its full expression, and it's diverted in the interest of keeping us alive, safe, and connected. So when there's no resolution to that stress, even if it's just like the subtly oppressive societal and relational soup where we can never quite relax, that precious energy gets stuck and it keeps running on protective pathways that mean well, but they're maladaptive. So like the gremlins, the ways that shows up can be pretty ugly and destructive. In the village, we saw the more cognitive layers of this. The villagers were organizing to keep the crown princess buried under the surface in the subconscious. The gremlins in the deeper layers in the body. It's kind of like they're having to do the dirty work for the villagers We may feel the gremlins in our bodies, uncontrollable urges or panic that floods the system. It's emotionally based. When this happens, it's really confusing. Our best intentions get overridden. We may end up betraying ourselves again and again. It could be linked to things like addictions, compulsions, impulsive behavior, shutting down, anxiety, and fear that has little to no basis in the present. Again, energy from the gremlins in their shadow form often feels so fast and so brutal, like we are at its mercy. And just to clarify, the gremlins are metaphorical. They're not demons or separate entities, but it's just the personal energy that is misdirected. I'm not saying that couldn't be an issue for a separate entity. I don't exclude that possibility, but what I'm talking about right now with the gremlins is it's all us. It's not an exorcism of the gremlins as you see in the story. It's a transformation. It's redirecting energy. And this concept aligns well with the teachings of Swiss psychologist Carl Jung. You've probably heard the term complex. That's basically what the gremlins are. They're complexes. In Jungian psychology, a complex holds an archetype, and an archetype is a whole energy structure that has within it both shadow and light, both positive and negative polarities. You see how that reflects the gremlins. They hold both shadow and light. I was kind of delighted. I didn't know this until a very short time ago after I'd already written the story, but I read in Jungian analyst James Hollis's book, Living with Borrowed Dust. Carl Jung had a lot of ways of describing complexes, and one of those was goblins, which is pretty close to our gremlins here, but I like gremlins because they can shift form, so that's why I picked them. And if you don't know me yet, if we're just meeting here, I'm not a psychoanalyst or a psychotherapist. I'm a somatic movement therapist. I just started really studying Jungian psychology about a year after I wrote this story. So the way I describe things is very intuitive, and it's also very based on how things feel in the body. It may not be the way that someone with that particular academic background would describe it. Whether you have that education or not, when you're in touch with your body and your own internal world, feeling how the subconscious shows up and how it feels for you, and you have this metaphorical imagery and you're linking it together, you might find that you understand the human experience on a whole new level that kind of transcends the mental explorations. Worth exploring for sure. We should all, whether we have access to those higher levels of education or not, or whether we're interested in it or not, still just be able to understand ourselves and how to navigate our inner world as humans. We cannot really afford for this psycho-spiritual work to be locked behind doors of privilege and academia. That's really the whole purpose of these stories, to give anyone who is willing to look a mirror to see your inner world clearly, and also kind of a map through as to how healing and transformation may unfold for you. Well, I don't want to overcomplicate or pathologize our gremlins. The symbolism shows how our beautiful, creative, benevolent gifts that we all know that on some level we have never left us. But just their unique energy might be caught in webs of chaos, and they're dealing with unintegrated trauma and stress and fear. And again, the younger we were when we formed these energy pathways, the more intense and existential life and death they feel. And you can't just override that survival physiology by thinking differently or being more determined. It's so powerful because it's meant to override everything else. As we learned from our story, all that pain is just a messenger. Our systems are not wreaking havoc on us for no reason, but until we integrate the old stories, let all these parts of our systems know that things have changed. There's a heroine in charge now. Those same old patterns of behavior seem like the only option. We see that when our heroine sits down and listens to the gremlins. They think they're protecting the kingdom and the crown princess by keeping her deep in the subconscious. They'd rather be doing something else, but they feel like it's their duty to continue on the path they were put on so long ago. The work is freeing that precious energy so it can move from the shadow form to the gift. And when that happens, we can return the precious inner child, the crown princess, to the castle of the heart. So the joy and wonder and creativity and love is able to radiate from that heart center of the kingdom. That might sound a little esoteric. What does that look like in real life? That strong heroine presence is like the healthy ego that keeps the archetypal energy in check. It filters the intensity. It sits with the intensity, knows what to do. It can offer love and kindness even through the biting and clawing until the energy shifts. It's cultivating a healthy, stable inner presence that can relate to ourselves and others without the shadow taking over. And it's becoming the person who can stabilize the room instead of matching others' chaos or wreaking more havoc. It's also calming our own inner chaos so we can hear our soul's messages. In so doing, we can break the cycles of self-betrayal and self-sabotage so that nothing is holding us back from bringing our gifts and medicine into the world. It is a lineage shifting work. When you return that crown princess to the heart of your kingdom, it will change how you show up, and that shifts future history. That's the vision that I hold for us with this story, and I hope you will hold it with me. And stay tuned because we have more stories and teachings, more maps of the human experience. The next one will be about the very profound initiations of heartbreak and abandonment. If you're looking for more resources to claim your heroine energy, I have a class on my website called The Heroine's Activation. I designed it to create a foundation of safety and support and flow so the healing unfolds naturally. Check that out if you like. When you work with these tools and integrate what you learn, you can expect to feel more aware of what's going on inside of you and be better able to respond to life by choice instead of reactions. You'll find a link to all of that below. Stay tuned for more videos. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next time.